Hello, my name is DeAndrea Bolden, and you are tuned in to the Faith and Mental Health Podcast. As always, I have another amazing guest lined up, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself to our listeners.
My name is Dr. Jennifer Jill Schwirzer. I am a mental health provider licensed in the state of Florida. I also run a mental health coaching and education network called Abide Network, found at abide.network.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about what you do. We were just talking before we went live, and Dr. Schwirzer was she was asking, well, how did you find me? And I was letting her know that I found her. If memory serves me correct, I found her on Instagram, and I instantly connected with a lot of the material and the content that she was posting. And I said, wow, this is right in line with faith and mental health. And I'm really big on trying to connect with others that are in this space, because I believe, as you know, kingdom minded people, I believe in collaboration. I believe that we can do more together. And I believe any opportunity that we have to promote what someone is doing that is in a line with this work, I just find it important. And so I want you to talk a little bit more about what you do as far as the faith and mental health component, because I know you are a clinician, but I want you to talk a little bit more about what you do in the intersection of faith and mental health.
Yeah, well, I have a faith background. I wanted actually to study theology. I wanted to go to the seminary when I was sort of gearing up to go to grad school after my kids grew up and launched. And I was like, I need to do something professional, get a graduate degree. And I asked my husband if he wanted me married to a pastor, and he said no. So I decided I didn't want to bring that into the home. And I thought, well, I could do something else. So I considered counseling as a career. And then I went through a master's program in counseling through Capella University. But because of my rich faith background and my knowledge of scripture, my love for scripture, I have always really kind of, quote, specialized in the intersection of faith and mental health, because I think that's where the power is. I think there's kind of two extremes. One is you just tell people to pray more,
Yeah.
and, kind of the glib, things we say to people about their mental health issues if they happen to be believers, and we kind of shut them down in the process. And that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is being so beholden to this sort of the professional behavioral health world, that you forget your faith moorings and forget that God is ultimately the healer. And so I really try to get into that intersection between the two, because I think science at its best, and there's a lot of garbage science out there, but science at its best is really just the study of reality. And when people study human behavior and human psychology, they will oftentimes come to conclusions that are actually biblical.
Yeah.
For example, one of the examples I like to give is this guy, Dashner Keltner, out of the University of Berkeley in California. He's not a believer. Most, behavioral health scientists are atheist or secularist or whatever. Very few of them are biblically oriented at all, but they study reality. And this guy wanted to study the issue of how awe affected people. And awe is very closely aligned with worship. So kind of the question he puts out there is worship good for people? And he has shown over and over again in experimental research, which can show causality. I mean, if you can move the variables in and out, you can establish pretty well causality. And he has shown over and over again in multiple ways that the experience of awe is good for people. It makes them more virtuous. It makes them kinder. It makes them happier. There's just a number of ways in which it, improves human experience. And he doesn't even control for the kind of awe. If you could argue that being at a baseball game, there's an awe, there a rock concert, there's an awe. But if we could do further research into what is causing the awe, I think it would be fascinating. But just awe itself seems to really help people be their best self and their happiest self. And to me, that's biblical, you know. God
Mhm.
tells us to worship not just because he's like an egomaniac up there trying to get all kinds of kudos from his created beings, but because it's good for us. And that's an important part of mental health. So yeah,
That's good. I
example.
like
Yeah.
another and so I have a heavy science background, chemistry, biology, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so one thing I will say that I is that the mental health and even the health community are embracing forgiveness. Now we
Yeah.
already know what scripture says, and so a lot of times let's say that science and the scholarly community is always catching up with the Bible because the Bible already said it. And so
Mhm.
they're promoting forgiveness therapy, and I there was a research study. I saw it not too long ago, but there was a physician that was sharing that some of the people that he was trying to treat that had really complicated health conditions, sorry, that were hard to treat. He said that he noticed that unforgiveness was an issue. And again, a lot of these people are not believers, like you said, but they are looking at the reality of what is happening with these people. What is going on? What are some commonalities? And so forgiveness is something that is really starting to be pushed and promoted more in the health community. And so I think that's really, really important. And so when we talk about the intersection of faith and mental health, um, you talk about bridging two worlds that oppose each other, bridging two worlds that offend each other, bridging two worlds that scream at each other. Because a lot of times we have to recognize that sometimes in the faith-based community, we're so closed-minded, we don't leave room for intellect. And sometimes in the scholarly community or in the science community, we're so high-minded and so data-driven, we don't leave room for that which is just faith.
Mhm.
um, you know, everything is not going to have empirical data behind it. Everything can't be measured, and you're doing your qualitative studies and all those things and quantitative studies. And
Mhm.
so I want to talk about what you do through Abide.
Yeah.
I think what you do is very, very important. I just interviewed Dr. Jamie, who is a part of Spiritual First Aid. I just had him on maybe like a couple weeks ago. And I was talking about, how important his work is. And so this platform is so that people like you, people that are doing the work, people that are bringing solutions to the faith community, that your voice is heard, that people know that what you have is available. Because a lot of people, I have people reaching out, well, I'm trying to do this or I'm trying to do that. And I'm like, well, there are organizations, like, so if it's something that I don't offer, hey, you can go over there.
Mhm.
I don't do, I don't have a mental health coaching thing together. So they can come, people can go to you. I don't do spiritual first aid. They can go to Dr. Jamie. And so
Yeah.
that's why it's important to recognize there's other people out there.
Mhm.
We all have a piece kind of the puzzle. So I want you to talk about Abide Network, how you got started, where that idea came from,
Yeah.
and what you do.
Yeah, so I love what you said about collaborating and referring to other ministries. We do that because we don't specialize in everything. So sometimes through our online coaching, we come up against a case, for example, that's beyond what can be done online, and we refer them like to an inpatient program, for example, such as Dr. Nedley's in California. We aren't abide chauvinists. We don't think we have everything
Right.
together. But the way it got started is it's meeting a very unique need, and that is that there are people with severe mental health issues that need in-person, sometimes inpatient treatment
Mm-hmm.
from a licensed professional that knows a lot about severe mental illness.
Absolutely.
But there are quite a few people, I would say, in the faith community that have kind of subclinical presentations, or people that have clinical presentations that really need to be seen by a licensed professional, but they could benefit from a faith-based coach as an adjunct to what the licensed professional is doing.
Correct.
Those are the people we minister to, because a lot of times people don't need some fancy technique, on them, and lots of sessions and
Yeah.
intensive therapy. They just need someone to talk to, someone with empathy and a few tools that they can give that person that in
Mm-hmm.
many cases will help resolve their mental health issues, or at least improve them better than going to a licensed professional locally. And I'm not trying to down licensed professionals,
Right, right, right.
one, but I'm saying that it can be kind of a, when it comes to someone who's seeking faith-based treatment, or at least treatment that is grounded in biblical truth, it can be kind of a like Russian roulette to go to a local licensed professional that may or may not at all support your faith. And
Uh-oh. You're breaking up.
to live a good lifestyle that would be very conducive to the children thriving and, learning the things they need to learn as children about God and so forth. So we wanted to do that. But one of the things I didn't calculate for is that it's a very isolative lifestyle. And so I was very isolated. I didn't have very much human support, and humans need support, both
Mhm.
horizontal and vertical, to thrive. So I was struggling with loneliness, but in addition to that, I started developing some health problems. And the combination of those things sort of dovetailed into this. I developed what could be called clinical depression. Like, I was having storms of suicidal thoughts. I was not wanting to live. I was feeling like my prayers were hitting a brass ceiling. I mean, I was really spiraling. And it was partly because of the circumstances, but it was also because I had certain habits of mind that I had developed when I was younger. And kind of the combination of those two things created a perfect storm where I was not equipped to deal with the level of difficulty that I was facing with both the health problems and the isolation. But I can see now that just talking to a person that had a few cognitive behavioral type tools that could show me the biblical grounding of them so I'd feel safe, and then just work with me on the way I was looking at reality, and just kind of helping me reframe and look at it from a different angle, I would have recovered much quicker than I did if I'd had that. But here's the thing, is that back then, and I'm quite old, um, there was no internet at all. And there was no really telephone counseling or anything like that.
Mhm.
Counselors pretty much were all seen in person. And I lived way out in the country. So finding a Christian counselor, a counselor in my faith background, was just
Right.
hopeless. And then I did find one that was like an hour and a half away, but the person didn't support a biblical worldview. They were kind of a
Right.
Christian in name. So it was just, you couldn't get help. That was the point. So by the time I graduated from my master's program, I thought, I want to give back to other people what I did not have. And interestingly enough, I did learn some things in the graduate program, even though it was a
Mhm.
fully secular program, that helped me as a Christian with my mental health. So my mental health was largely resolved. My issues were largely resolved by the time I started practicing. And I just wanted to give back to people what I didn't have. And the internet is now becoming commonplace. Everyone has a computer and a connection. And then telephone counseling had become a thing. So I
Mhm.
set up Abide Counseling. Now, because of I was a published author, and so I got, literally clients from all over the world wanted to see me. And I
Okay.
started to realize this is kind of a legal issue.
Right.
So let me just make it simple. Over the years, I've changed to where what I do is coaching. It falls within the realm of coaching.
So
And
that you can see people anywhere.
that's right, because we'll get people all over the world, literally.
Correct.
But what also happened is, okay, a couple things. One is that I discovered the discipleship model of mental health, or the discipleship model imported into the mental health realm.
Hmm.
Because what happened was, I started giving trainings. People came to me and were like, "What do you do as a faith-based counselor?" So I thought, I'll put a training together and just share with them what I do. I'm not going
Hmm.
to pretend it's some magical formula that only the most
Right.
degreed and licensed can have access to. I'm going to share. And so I did, and people started to really enjoy that training. And then one weekend when I was having the training, I was seeing this client, and she was not doing well, and nothing I did made any difference. She was so stuck in depression. So for some reason, I don't remember what it was, but I invited her. I was doing the training that weekend, and I thought, is this like a weird dual relationship where she's
Hmm.
actually learning how to do coaching, but she's so messed up herself? But what happened was she got better once she got through her head that I don't have to be there before I start helping others. And so,
Right.
of course, there have to be some management of that because you can
Yeah,
get
yeah,
people
yeah.
who are just really in bad shape and they're not really fit. And so we have in the network, we do have a caveat where we say it's at our discretion if we don't think that you're in a place where you can help
Can
others.
handle it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
gonna, but since then we've trained, I think we have over 50 coaches right now.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think you said a couple things that stood out, and I think it's important, um, especially for someone that may be listening. One thing we have to realize in the professional world of mental health is that everyone, of course, is not a believer, but everyone should be equipped. And so the benefit of something like Abide Network and mental health counseling is that even if your therapist or your psychiatrist, if you need to actually see a physician for
Yeah.
pharmaceutical treatment,
Yeah.
um, Abide can come and be supplemental
That's right.
to
That's
deal
right.
with the spiritual part, because there are statistics and research that shows that people that attend service do better with their mental health, people
Mhm.
that have faith in God do better with their mental health. And so having someone that can integrate your mental health sometime isn't always available, especially
Mhm.
when someone has a mental health crisis. And
Mhm.
so realizing that, what she's doing is an important work, because let's say somebody has, just like, hey, this person has to go to a psychiatrist, we may have to get some inpatient treatment or whatever. But then even if they're dealing with somebody that just has a straight secular approach, still understanding that psychology, abnormal psychology, mental health counseling, and all these things, clinical psychology, there's a lot of science and data and research behind this where you can still get the help that you need. But
Mhm.
that's where something like Abide Network would come in to supplement and walk alongside you and do
Mhm.
this, help you with the spiritual aspects of it. Because I do think, and I want to make sure that we clarify the difference between a licensed professional mental health clinician and a mental health coach. And so the reason what she says she does the coaching is because she's not under the stipulations of her license. Because with a mental health professional, when you're licensed, you're only allowed to treat people that live in that state or the
Yeah.
states where you can provide care. And it's very specific guidelines and things as far as ethics and your responsibilities and your guidelines with the licensing board. There's different criteria that has to be met. There's academic components, of course. I have a master's in counseling, so there's different things that are needed academically when it comes to becoming a licensed professional that can assess, diagnose, treat, and then when you talk about medicate, except for 5 states, you have to be a psychiatrist, which is a board certified medical doctor. But there's 5 states that do allow psychologists to do postdoctoral work to be able to prescribe medication under the authority of a
Wow. I didn't know
physician.
that.
And so, yeah, it's 5 now. And so I just wanted to make sure I explain that, because I know a lot of times, especially in the church, I love the saints, but we tend to take everything and just dump it in one big box. And I had to explain to people, psychiatrists and psychologists are not the same. They don't have the same treatment nor the same authority. And so I just want to make sure people understand
Yeah.
that. But mental health coaching can give you tools that you need so that you're able to better cope with the stressors of life. You're able to be more resilient, and you're
Yeah.
able to get things under control. And so I always suggest, if you're going to do mental health counseling, do that alongside your professional counseling if that's what you need. But I'm big on get all the help you need so that you
Yeah.
can be the best version of yourself, because you cannot give your best if you're not your best.
Yeah, I love that. I really appreciate that. And that distinction between psychiatrists and psychologists, because people just say everything is psych, you know. You can be a licensed counselor and call
Mm-hmm.
yourself a psychotherapist because
Correct.
psychotherapist is kind of a wastebasket term. But I want to say this about Abide Network is that we do take seriously the laws, state laws, and so forth, and we realize that we're kind of a little different than your typical presentation, but we're doing it for a reason because the faith community is underserved. And if we don't package it well in a faith-based way, and then they're not going to be served, some of them.
They won't.
And so we're providing something needed, and we do refer to professionals quite often and say, you need more than what we can give you. We also have an intake supervisor, and she looks at each intake form and decides whether they're appropriate or if there need to be adjunct helpers
Yeah.
in the mix. And so we take that very seriously. But I'll tell you, I've had a bit of a journey with that too, where I just was kind of resentful, feeling like, why can't we just not just can't we just ignore these
Yeah.
laws? They're not really set up to help people. But then I realized I needed to move everything into coaching, away from counseling, because it's very difficult to see the difference sometimes. And there is a lot of overlap between coaching and counseling. And there's about 20 different opinions, or maybe 100 different opinions as
Hmm.
to where the distinction lies.
Hmm.
So, but to be safe, we decided we would use the methods that are and promote the tools that are considered coaching tools versus
Yeah.
only counseling tools. And that meant being less concerned about the past, more concerned about setting goals and moving into the future, and maybe avoiding deep trauma processing in what we do. And so there's a whole bunch of ancillary issues with that. But as I did this, I went through the website recently and removed all of the language that would be confusing, and told all the coaches we need to be doing coaching. And if you get beyond that, then we need to deal with it appropriately. Um, and I realized that actually the coaching methods I have found overall to be more effective. Because what happens with deep trauma processing, and I'm not against it. In fact, you could call me a traumatologist, um, because I got a doctoral degree in community counseling with a concentration in traumatology, and I do a trauma workshop, and I've treated people for trauma for years. So you could call me a traumatologist. So I'm not against deep trauma processing. In fact, I want to do an experimental study on walking therapy for trauma, because I feel that walking bilateralizes the brain in the same way that EMDR does. And so I want to, do
That's good.
a research project on that. So I'm not against deep trauma processing. However, I will say that people can get stuck there, and counseling can turn into just ruminating over and over again instead of moving on.
I
And
understand what you're
coaching,
saying.
yeah, and coaching kind of protects against that because it's very forward moving and very goal oriented. So I was really, in the end, I was kind of resentful maybe that the counseling industry wants to have so much control. But then I was like, you know what? Okay, we'll do coaching. And it actually works in many cases. It meets the needs of people, um, and resolves issues and does a great job. So it's very effective.
That's good. That's good. So yeah, so I'm loving it, and I think still what you said is very true. If things are not packaged right, the church is going to hee haw and buck up against it, and and so it's very hard. This is a very very tough spot to be in, and it definitely takes God's grace to be able to balance, like you got a foot in one world because you're clinically trained, but then you got a foot in another one because you're a kingdom citizen. And so we try to balance it, and it's not all,
Love it.
there's a lot of trial and error. Like you said, okay, I got to go back, we're going to take this clinical language off here, we're doing this,
Yeah.
we're putting everything in the box of coaching. I do think what you're doing is so necessary. I keep
Yeah.
telling people that we're getting ready to see one of the biggest mental health crises that we've ever seen, and we need all
We're already
hands on
seeing
deck.
it.
And
Yeah.
so we need mental health coaches everywhere, because a lot of people don't have the capacity to cope with stress. A lot of people don't have the capacity to deal sometimes with the ups and downs of life. And there's just a lot of changes. Technology is coming in. And so that's going to take people's jobs away. And, people will feel like they don't have purpose. They can fall into depression. People can be dealing with anxiety, all type of things. And so, we have to, in the church world, be prepared. And I'm grateful for what you do, because you're making mental health more palatable for the church, because the saints can be quite obstinate when it comes to getting help.
Let me give you an example. Okay, so during the pandemic, do you know who Neville Peter is, the singer? He's
Mm-mm.
blind and he plays piano and sings. He's like
Uh-uh.
a Christian Stevie Wonder.
Uh-uh.
Anyway, He lives right down the road from me. And during the pandemic, he couldn't tour. And that's how he supports his family. So God impressed me. I've always wanted to create meditations that are biblical, but utilize some of the same things that Eastern meditation utilizes that are beneficial, like deep breathing is good for your
Mhm.
nervous system and it
Yeah.
does calm anxiety. That's science. That's
Yeah.
not new age, it's science, and they
Right.
happen to take advantage of it. So I thought, why not create a Christian version? So we created 120 audio meditations
Nice.
that start with a breathing exercise, go into a devotional, and then he does a scripture song. He's a very gifted singer and songwriter. And for the most part, people have loved them. They're free.
Mhm.
Anybody can access them. JesusMeditations.org is the website,
Okay.
JesusMeditations.org, freeware. It's on all the sound platforms. Really has been a blessing to a lot of people. But some of the believers have been like, it's new age.
Oh
New
no,
age.
Saints. Listen,
And the thing is,
I get it.
I didn't take any prompts or look into any new
Yep.
age material. I
Mm-mm.
didn't create it out of that. I created it because I knew deep, slow breathing helps me, you know. But people react to things that look
Yeah.
like the world and they assume that you got it from the world. But some of the
Right.
things in the world were God's idea.
Yeah, you're not gonna, rebuke the dentist. You need your teeth cleaned. So sometimes we have to understand that we can be a little too spiritual without being practical. I got a lot of pushback, and I keep talking about it. Meditation. I said meditation is biblical. The Bible talks about us meditating on His Word day and night. Meditation is something. It's in the Bible 23 times. I believe in Psalms 119. The majority of the scriptures are on meditation are in there. The Bible tells us to meditate on His Word, His goodness. We're supposed to think on these things. And so, because of what we see as far as the whole yoga based and new age based meditation, we reject meditation as a whole instead of realizing this is a God thing. We just have to keep it within the boundaries of scripture. We're supposed to be meditating on His Word and His goodness, not just opening our minds so that any random thing that floats in. No, the devil will float in. You gotta, we have to be intentional that we're meditating on scripture. We're ruminating on it. Like you said, I tell people anything you think about over and over and over and over, you're meditating on it. You're rehearsing it. You're musing on it. You're keeping it in the front of your mind. And so there and the thing is I can't get mad at people because the world of wellness and mental health has really been overtaken by a lot of new age. I
It
had a lady
is.
that reached out. She wanted to be a speaker for my event. Now, I don't require that everyone is a Christian. I have people that are doctors, nurse practitioners, all type of people that'll be a part of my events. And I'm fine with that because they're talking about their expertise. Somebody's a psychiatric nurse, they have something to say about mental health because that's what they do every day. But I went on the lady's website, long story short, and the first thing I see, this is her counseling website. Her sitting in a chair, leaned with her hand out with a handful of tarot cards. I said, now,
Whoa.
too many people in the mental health community are introducing people to new age practices. Now, if we want to talk about spirituality, religion, and beliefs, you have to ask permission to integrate those things into mental health care if you're doing things right according to your license. And so, but a lot of people are unsuspecting and don't know any better. I had somebody reach out to me. They were going somewhere to try to get, like people take different bitters and tinctures, like soursop bitters and stuff like that. They're trying to get some bitters and they wanted to read their palm and give them a reading. And they reached out to me and I said, don't do it. They were like, absolutely not. And so this is what's happening when people are reaching out for help. They're going for help, but then they're getting a lot of other things pushed on them as well. And so what you're doing is so important and so
Don't
needed.
need it. Sorry, I'm in a hotel room.
Oh
Sorry
no,
about
you're fine. So, but what you're doing is so important and so needed. And so I want to take the last few minutes. I want to let you let people know how to find you. Let people know if they're interested in mental health coaching,
Yeah.
how they can do that. How they can follow you on social media and all that stuff.
Yeah. All they have to do is go to literally abide.network. That's all you put in the search engine, no .com, no .org, just abide.network. And then they click around on the website. If they want to get coaching, there's a button that says get coaching, pretty
Mm-hmm.
obvious. And then if they want the training, it's called the Abide Coach Training. And it's under the courses. And if they can't find something because the website is growing, it's very high traffic. The only notifications I have on my phone, because I hate notifications, are the Abide Network website notifications, and they're rolling all day long. Like the thing has
Yeah.
exploded during the pandemic when all these businesses were closing, like ours just took off. We
Yeah.
started a Bible study, a Friday night Bible study that's going to be here in a few hours online, a Zoom Bible study
Mm-hmm.
during the pandemic. It's still going and like 50 people come.
Wow,
You
it's
know, it's
good.
crazy, like the need. I mean, you know this, being into faith-based mental health, that there's such a need there. There's so many people that
Yep.
want help with their mental health, and but they're hesitant, and they
Yeah.
will step into, a ministry or whatever if it's faith-based. So it has really taken off.
That's
Um,
good.
yeah, and there's a lot of activity going on. I can't remember where I started with that one. It's just busy. Oh,
Good,
how do
good,
you
good,
get
good.
in touch with us? Yeah, just go to the website abide.network, and I will be very easy to find, and
Awesome.
someone will answer. Yeah.
Awesome. So I want to say thank you again to
You're
my guest,
welcome.
Dr. Jennifer Schwirzer.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to those that are tuned in. And like I say every time, until next time, thank you.